It was a deep, chilling fog that blanketed the Sea of Okhotsk in the North Pacific, a fog thick enough to swallow sound and shadow alike. The vessel cutting through it, flying a flag the world thought was dead, was the CSS Shenandoah. To the men aboard, commanded by Lieutenant Commander James Waddell, the year was still 1864. They were Confederate privateers, sailing under letters of marque issued by a government that, in reality, had ceased to exist weeks prior. Their mission? To prosecute the war against the Union at its most vulnerable point, its merchant fleet. The Shenandoah was not built for the Confederacy. She was the Sea King, a clipper built in Scotland. Purchased and covertly outfitted in Liverpool, she slipped out under the guise of a peaceful trade vessel before raising the stars and bars. For 18 months she had been the scourge of the seas, traversing the Atlantic, rounding the Horn, and wreaking havoc in the Pacific, transforming from a sleek merchant ship into a formidable black-holed man of war, armed with 8 powerful guns. Their existence was a paradox, a physical manifestation of a political reality that had already crumbled. Waddell had maintained a disciplined, almost monastic existence, keeping his crew, a mix of hardened sailors, captured Confederates, and impressed Southerners, isolated from the news of the outside world, clinging to dispatches that were, by the summer of 1865, already ancient history. The crew was utterly dedicated, driven by the belief that every captured prize, every captured bale of cotton, every seized barrel of whale oil, every scuttled American schooner was a necessary sacrifice for the eventual triumph of the Southern cause. They had hunted whalers in the Bering Sea, a brutal, icy frontier where the pursuit of oil was as fierce as any battle on land. They had struck the Union's commercial jugular from the waters off Japan to the Aleutian Islands. By the time they entered the Okhotsk Sea, the Shenandoah had captured, burned, or sunk 38 American vessels. The total estimated damage to Union commerce was staggering, reaching nearly $1.8 million, a colossal sum in 1865. And the psychological toll on Northern shipping interests was immeasurable. The irony of their continuing existence was rooted in geography and communication breakdown. They were too far, too fast, and too successful to be intercepted by the Union Navy, who were busy managing Reconstruction and looking for Confederate leaders fleeing overseas. It was on August 2, 1865, near the mouth of the Columbia River, that the Shenandoah finally encountered a ship that carried current news. It was the British bark Hera, bound for San Francisco. The captain of the Hera, a man who carried the weight of reality in his eyes, delivered the news that shattered the Confederate illusion. General Robert E. Lee had surrendered at Appomattox in April. The Confederate government was dissolved. The war. To simply lay down his arms felt like treason. Yet to continue firing on American ships after the cessation of hostilities was piracy under international law. The decision before him was perhaps the heaviest borne by any naval commander in American history: to acknowledge defeat without seeing the enemy, or to become an outlaw. Waddell ordered the men assembled. The silence on the deck was absolute as he read the dispatch. The reaction was not one of immediate joy, but of profound, crushing disbelief, quickly followed by a furious, desperate anger. They had sacrificed everything, sailed thousands of miles, endured ice and battle for nothing. Waddell, in an act of ultimate naval discipline and honor, chose the latter path. He would surrender, but only to a legitimate representative of the United States government. He steered the Shenandoah, his last living link to a lost nation, not toward the nearest Confederate port, which no longer existed, but toward Liverpool, England, the place of her birth. On November 6, 1865, the former Confederate warship, having sailed 120,000 miles since leaving Britain, dropped anchor in the Mersey River,
an American officer was summoned. Waddell formally handed over his commission and his ship to the U.S. consul. The stars and bars were hauled down for the final time, not in a blaze of glory, but in the quiet, somber waters of a neutral port. The story, however, did not end with the surrender. The U.S. government seized the Shenandoah, but the Shenandoah story was far from over. The damage done, the 38 captured ships and their cargoes, was not simply written off. The owners of those seized vessels, now counting their losses, sued the United States government in a landmark international arbitration case, arguing that Britain had violated its Foreign Enlistment Act by allowing the Sea King to be secretly armed and launched as a Confederate vessel. This Alabama claims arbitration, which dragged on for years, ultimately centered on the legality of the Shenandoah's entire commission. The final settlement, a complex web of international law and diplomacy, would cost the United States millions of dollars, a final financial echo of the Confederate War that refused to die, all sparked by the desperate, isolated voyage of one ghostly warship sailing in the fog while the country was already at peace. The Shenandoah was the Confederacy's final, lingering, and most expensive signature on the ledger of the Civil War.